All right. It's 2 past. Let's go ahead and get started. Uh, Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Happy New Year. We get the presentation up here. All right. So welcome to first Near Southeast Steering Committee meeting of 2023. I'm going to start with sort of an overview of engagement so far throughout the entire process, share some numbers around that, and then what we've been doing so far in the draft plan review. Then we have a few policy items we want to talk through with potential updates in the plan and based on what we're hearing from the community and others, and then talk a little bit about upcoming things. So that's the agenda. And then if there's anything else anyone wants to talk about, we should hopefully have some time to cover any other items if there's anything that you've thought of that you want to discuss with the steering committee. Let's start with the engagement overview. So this is throughout the entire process up to November, basically. So this doesn't have the very latest. And if you were at either of our workshops back in December, you saw this same slide. But wanted to share it with the entire steering committee. So throughout the process, we've had over 7,000 people provide, or 7,000 responses on our various online surveys, including over 5,400 individual comments that we have reviewed. About 4,000 what we call touch points, since we can't always keep track of whether we're talking to a new person or someone we've talked to before. But we've had about 4,000 interactions with people through our online activities and our in-person activities, including over 1,000 in person at our pop-up events, at community events. This doesn't include the folks who were at the December workshop, and I'll cover that in just a second. But so well over 1,000 people that we've talked to in person at the 39 plus community events and meetings. This is now our 16th steering committee meeting. We've had focus groups with various subject matter experts and stakeholders, as well as the now 7 community workshops. And then in sort of our digital reach, we've had nearly 10,000 people look at our emails or open our emails. About 23,000 people see our information on Facebook, 11,000 on Twitter, and 4,600 on Nextdoor. So we've gotten pretty broad reach. And again, that's not necessarily unique individuals, but it's maybe some people seeing things multiple times. But we do think we've gotten pretty good and broad awareness of the plan through all of these things that we've done with throughout the planning process. And then specifically for our phase 4 or draft plan outreach, we've had over 50 people comment on the draft plan. These numbers were pulled yesterday. You may have noticed we sent out another email yesterday afternoon. So we've had a few more. Those emails always generate some response. We've had a few more since we pulled these numbers yesterday. So even more commenters than that. We had about 90 people in attendance at the in-person community workshop and about 37 in the virtual workshop back in December. And we've been continuing our intentional engagement. We did an event at the Hudson Apartments back in December, and we have another one coming up next weekend with some immigrant and refugee community members in the area. So through that, we've gotten over 180 comments. And again, this was as of yesterday, so we have a few more to add to that that we've gotten today, including at the office hours that Kristen and I had at Cook Park Rec Center this afternoon that we had several people show up to talk to us about. So we got even more feedback at that. But of the people who have answered our survey question of what level of support they have for the plan, 57% fully support the plan. Another 23% mostly support the plan. So that's 80% that either fully or mostly support the plan. And another 11% support some elements, but not others. So that's over 90% that have some level of support for the plan, and only 9% that do not support the plan. So we're pretty happy about that, of the people who have reviewed it, that most of them are fairly happy with the plan. There are certainly some comments we've gotten, but again, most of those have been sort of constructive things to improve the plan, and not too many folks that have serious concerns about what we're proposing in the plan. But of the folks who do have concern about it, or who have said they don't support the plan, it seems to mostly be driven by a lot of concern about growth overall, that by allowing more growth, it'll negatively impact the community. We won't have the infrastructure and other things we need to support that growth. It'll cause more traffic problems and more safety concerns in the areas, and will not address affordability, will make things less affordable. And we'll talk through some of these issues here in a minute, but we do think that we have recommendations in the plan that will address these things around making sure that we're getting growth in the appropriate places, providing the infrastructure that's needed, addressing traffic and safety and affordability along with all of that. So that's sort of where we are. The draft plan will stay up for comments at least through the 22nd of this month is our plan right now, to leave it up until then. Then we'll pull all the comments, start making updates to the draft plan. We have an informational item scheduled with Planning Board for March 1st. So we'll get a revised draft of the plan up for the community to see ahead of that meeting. And our plan is to leave that up for a few weeks after that info item with Planning Board as well, to give folks another opportunity to review that updated draft plan, provide some final comments on it before we make any final changes for the Planning Board hearing, which is scheduled for mid-April. So that's sort of where we are. We'll do an update to the draft plan, have a sort of shortened second public review, which again, because we've gotten pretty positive feedback on it, we think that'll be sufficient to give folks one last chance to review it and comment on it, make any final changes before we really start the adoption process in April. So that was the engagement overview. Let me pause there for any questions, comments on any of that. Judy.
Hi, everybody, and Happy New Year. I looked at the plan. I was disappointed to see that there was a bike lane on Florida. That is not a good idea. I don't know if you realize that, but Florida is going to get extremely busy when that new development goes in Aurora or unincorporated Arapahoe County at Potter's Church. It already now has a lot of traffic. The other thing is that Landmark has 160 units. I'm sorry, 126 units. We have 63 parking places on our lot. Every unit has a single car garage. Across the street from us is Windsong, which is in unincorporated Arapahoe County, with close to 300 residents. They also have garages, but there is parking on both sides of the street. Now, were you planning on putting a bicycle lane in there, or were you planning on using the sidewalk as a lane? I think a bicycle lane is going to be very dangerous. And a sidewalk, because our sidewalks get a lot of with people walking pets, and in my experience, at least with bicyclists, particularly in City of Chennai Park, coming through the park, has been they come up behind you, but they don't let you know that they're there. And I've avoided possible, accidents because fortunately I was able to get out of the way with my dog quickly. But these are concerns that I have. And unfortunately, not all of the cyclists really, are let you know that they're there. So, and I think on Florida, it's not going to be a good idea.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, actually we had one of the open space and trails planners from Arapahoe County stop by our office hours earlier today. And he was talking about some similar issues around that Florida proposed bike lane and how that integrates into what they're doing in Arapahoe County. And so one of the things we were talking about with him was potentially shifting that bike priority off of Florida down to Iowa or something like that. So I think that's those are good comments and something we'll take a look at and see if there's a better way to accommodate bikes in there while making sure that it's safe and convenient for everyone.
And Scott, if I can just chime in there, I do think that this is a good suggestion, and it's something that we can certainly look at. I do want to note that this is a recommendation that we just carried over from Denver Moves Bikes. So that was something that Dottie has on their radar, but I do appreciate the feedback and the suggestion. I think it's something that we should certainly look at. They will obviously do a full analysis before just putting in a bike lane, and I'm sure that they've already done at least some preliminary designs or kind of research for this particular stretch. But yeah, I think it's good to hear that, Scott, we talked to Arapahoe County and they might have some similar concerns. So I think it's something we could definitely look at. But I just wanted to note that it was something that we carried over from Denver Moves Bikes, at least for that particular stretch of Florida.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. All right. Saw Councilman Cashman had his hand up, but he seems to have put it down. So Harvey, I think you're next.
Then I'll go next. I just want to make, I have two comments. First of all, the bike lane in Florida, having experience with bike lanes and working with Dottie, I wouldn't trust their facts and figures of what they might be showing on Florida. I've gone through this, and I'll just say it right there. The second thing is, you say you had 183 comments back. What is the entire sample size that we're looking at for residents in this area in the near southeast?
What is the population? I think it's somewhere around 40,000. I know we have it.
Well, let's just say it's 40,000. If we're talking 40,000, 183 is not really a significant sample size, and may not be telling what the neighbors really want. So
yeah,
I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Right. I mean, we never get a statistically significant sample size. That's not the way we do it, but we would certainly love to have more people comment on the plan. And we're doing some things to try to boost engagement. Like I said, we sent out another email yesterday. We'll send out a couple more before we close it down. We've done another paid Facebook post that seems to generate some additional response.
So
yeah,
what number would be, as you say, statistically significant, at least for this project? What would you be happy with the final response?
Well, again, our goal isn't to be statistically significant. So what we would be happy with is to have a few hundred people who have looked at the plan and provided feedback on it. And so between the online commenters, the folks at the two workshops, the folks we've talked to at our office hours and at our intentional engagement, we think we're getting close to having that. And again, considering that the feedback we have gotten is pretty positive, we think that may be one reason why we're not getting as many comments that most people are happy with it, so they're not commenting a lot on the draft.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Lisa.
Happy New Year to everybody. I just want to go back to the bike lane idea in Florida. I don't want to, bang the drum, but Iowa is such a, I live off Iowa, so it's a much better idea. And I think that Florida looks like it's a better idea because the connectivity around the middle school and routes east, and it is a nice, fairly direct route, but as Judy said, increasingly dangerous. And so Iowa, I just wanted to point out that if we were going to change to that configuration, that we should point out the excellent connectivity, because Iowa connects to Trenton, Trenton connects to Colorado Avenue, which connects to the lovely new improvements along the Cherry Creek, as well as good access to Quebec Way down Colorado Avenue to get to the new lovely parking lot that Arapahoe County built to get onto the Highline Canal. So there's a lot of nice connectivity there, and I hope we can emphasize that in the plan. One other comment that I just want to make, because I also did review the plan, and I have to say that I, kind of reviewed, my area in specifics, and I'm just kind of concerned about the lack of addressing the actual aesthetics of Quebec Street between, especially between Leetsdale and Evans, what I would call the no man's land of bunkers and rock islands that have not been maintained in a bazillion years. So crunched up concrete 50-year-old streetlights and signalization just is not inviting, and it is completely an eyesore compared to the rest of the area. So I'm gonna just throw that out there.
Yeah, thanks. We'll take another look at that and make sure we're addressing that in the plan. That's a good point. And yeah, on the earlier point around Florida and Iowa, we'll take a look at all those connectivity issues and make sure it works, and whichever one we end up with, that we're making those connections to the trail, to both trails, and across Quebec and across the canal and all that stuff. So all right. Any other comments on the outreach or engagement so far? All right. So
yeah, I'm just
Oh.
wondering about the comments. As I've expressed, one of the major changes to status quo that I see this plan does is suggests a major change in the single unit zone areas to duplex. Have we gotten any comments? Because I find it hard to believe folks are just kind of going, okay, cool. We'll just change the nature of the area.
that is a perfect segue to what we were going to talk about. So
Just let people know you didn't pay me, okay? I'm not a shit.
we had this planned. So yeah, we've actually gotten comments on both sides of that. There are folks who, as you say, have some concerns about allowing duplexes in these areas. But we also gotten some comments from folks who think we should allow duplexes in more areas within Near Southeast, that all the residential areas. So we've gotten some on both sides. And then we've gotten some sort of generally about, concerns about the change in the character if we allow duplexes, and then some getting into some of the more specifics around if we allow duplexes, how is that impacting affordability, even the areas where we say we want to protect affordability, aren't these really just encouraging scrapes, which are going to end up displacing people, even if you say you're trying to prevent that? And the areas where we're recommending allowing a lot splits on the larger lots, or is that going to have the same effect? So we've got some comments on both sides of that. So we want to spend some time talking with you today about that and how to address those concerns and where to fall on the balance on those things. Councilwoman Sawyer.
Thanks, Scott. I agree with Councilman Cashman, and I just am wondering, so in my experience during the East Area planning process, one of the contentious issues that came up that the community was really concerned about was affordable housing, and that's something that we had prioritized in the plan as a community based on community feedback. At the time, the EHA, our Expanding Housing Affordability program, which is an inclusionary zoning program that requires that any building over 10 units include 10%-ish, depending on the size of the unit, affordable housing built into the actual building. That plan was being talked about, but was not in existence at the time that the East Area Plan went through. So I'm wondering if, because I think the concern with duplex zoning is that we've seen across the city, and I'll just say Sunnyside is a great example of it. When they were zoned 2 unit, everything, Cherry Creek is another great example of it. When they were zoned 2 unit, what happened was investors came in, scraped all of the lower cost, quote unquote, attainable, not affordable, capital A affordable, but attainable, lower cost housing, built $2 million duplexes on each piece of land and priced out all of the people who were there in the first place. So it actually accelerated gentrification. It did not stop gentrification. Wondering whether the city has a plan for that down the road, if there are policy discussions going on in CPD about how to manage that issue, because we've seen it happen in Denver already, and we don't want it to happen here. That's the kind of the purpose of having this land use discussion, but it might be like what happened with the East Area Plan process, where it's something that's being discussed but isn't in draft legislative form yet. So just curious whether that's out there.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right that we've seen this not go well in other parts of the city, and we don't want that to happen here. So as we've talked about, we won't implement these regulations or these allowances for duplexes until we have policies in place that we think will address that. So we are having those conversations as part of this plan, and then the idea is that you wouldn't be allowed to have the duplexes until we get it figured out and have something in place to address all of those concerns.
Can I just ask if I think that's great, and I really appreciate that commitment, Scott. But I just have to ask, we're coming up on the end of the mayoral administration, and a new mayor may have new policy initiatives and new ideas, and certainly there will be, a new head of CPD implementing that policy. So can we really promise our communities that they, that this won't be implemented? Is it written into the plan in specific language? I just want to make sure that there are assurances of that, because I don't want to have happen here what happened over in Cherry Creek and Sunnyside.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. We have written it that way in the plan, that these things shouldn't be allowed until we have the policies in place to address these concerns, so that if it is in the adopted plan, then regardless of what the new mayor wants or the new executive director of CPD, any changes to the code or any changes to zoning have to be consistent with the adopted plans, and we'll have it in the plan. So yes, I think we're addressing those concerns. Please take a look at it and make sure that you think that language is strong enough, because it'll be you on the council that will be voting on it. So we want to make sure that we have the language in there that you can point to say yes or no, this is implementing the plan.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Councilman.
Yeah, I'll defer to Jared.
Okay. Jared.
Yeah, I think my concern is more the density, and this has a little bit to do with what we were talking about of community engagement. Like there's so much information. It feels like some of this stuff is getting buried, and specifically the rezoning feels like, fixing the sidewalk from Holly, right, is like somehow equally, it takes up the same space in the plan as like rezoning all of Virginia Village. And I don't know, obviously it's a perspective bias of what you think is important. And so there's a lot of important information in the plan, but it feels like it's hard to figure out how any person is supposed to digest the stuff that could reshape their neighborhood, and what's the stuff that's like, we're hoping to get some sidewalks completed or fixed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's fair. That, yeah, it is a big plan. There's a lot in it. We've tried to highlight the things that we think are most important. We have the executive summary at the beginning. We have at the beginning of each chapter some highlights of what the sort of key recommendations are. So
And is the forgive me, because I was scrolling through the plan because I was trying to find like where. So in the executive summary, because I just clicked on it, and under housing and economy, there's nothing that talks about that I've seen immediately about rezoning or the moving from single family homes to duplex. Is that in the executive summary?
yeah, I believe it is. Let me pull it up here. And it's probably under land use instead of housing and economy.
Okay. And again, I know that there's a lot of different things that are important to a lot of different people in a plan. I just think that this duplex conversation, and specifically Virginia Village, that seems to be one of the larger things that's coming out of the plan.
Yeah.
I mean, again, and bike lanes are important, and sidewalks are important, and Evans obviously is important. But I think so. My question just more is around like, if there are at least a handful of us that would say this is a very important thing, that it gets highlighted in an executive summary, so that people don't feel like that it got buried in a several 100-page plan.
Right.
And it's like, well, it's in there. It's like, yeah, but the reality of anybody kind of finding that information. So thanks.
Yeah. So it's in the under balanced housing options in the executive summary. It talks about these recommendations around duplexes along with other things like that. So yeah, we can look at ways to highlight that some more and make sure folks are paying attention to that. And I think if you saw the email we sent out yesterday, that's we highlighted it in that email. So I don't know if you're on our mailing list, you would have seen that go out yesterday afternoon, that we are trying to make sure people are aware of that issue and are paying attention and commenting on it.
So I'm under the balanced housing options on the executive summary. Am I right on that? It's
Yep.
like the last page, left-hand side. Is
Yep.
that where you
That's
are?
it.
Okay. And so LU6 community priorities include, is that the provide a variety of high quality and affordable housing options ranging from triplexes to townhomes? Is that the sentence that we're talking about?
So it's sort of 6, 7, and 8 are all addressing missing middle housing
Okay.
options.
And I don't think anybody's going to disagree with providing and promoting affordable housing.
Right.
I think people are going to find that rezoning single family homes to duplexes would be obviously everything is in how you say it. So
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Councilman.
Yeah, just along the same lines, I don't want to give the wrong impression. I think duplexes definitely can play a role. It's such a critical thing to be done right, and we haven't yet done it right in New Denver. And so for me, and this is half thought through, there's something saying that we're open to looking at how to best integrate duplexes into formerly single unit neighborhoods, but that we recognize the complexity and that a task force be formed to especially look at that missing middle issue. But I don't want any thought that this passage of this plan, while there's so many good things in it, including the discussion of duplexes. All of a sudden, now your neighbor can go down to City Hall and rezone for duplexes. So
Right.
I think we're all saying the same thing, and I will look at the specific language again and make specific recommendations that we can consider moving forward.
Yeah, great, right. Yeah, I think we're all on the same page that
Yeah, I
we need to-
appreciate that recognition, Scott.
yeah, we need to figure out the right way to do this before we start allowing it. So yeah, please take a look at it, make sure that you're comfortable with what that's saying. And we can make any improvements we need to it. Lisa,
Well, I do kind of think the Virginia Village area. I just think it would go exactly the same way as Cherry Creek and Sunnyside. I mean, I just think because of the level of the expense of the housing that's there now, I don't see anybody doing that kind of, okay, I'm going to do a duplex to make, you know, kind of an affordable unit or something like that. I just don't see it happening in that neighborhood, at least not in the next 20 years. So I really will I'm going to beat another dead horse again. I don't know why, you know, we're thinking about introducing affordability in that area, but we keep on ignoring, you know, Holly and Florida, where the commercial is, that could be some kind of a mixed use with retail on the bottom and units on the top that can introduce a good level of affordability into the area. Even some of the other houses along Holly Street, I think could introduce, you know, elements of duplexes as opposed to deep into the innards of Virginia Village.
yeah. So to your first point, you're right. I mean, nobody's going to do that voluntarily, right? That's why we need to, if we're going to allow it, we need to have rules in place that would require them to provide that affordability or provide that preservation or whatever. So, yeah, I think, again, I think we're in agreement that just allowing duplexes would result in a bad outcome that nobody wants to see. So we're trying to come up with the policies, and as Councilman Cashman said, it'll be, you know, a follow-on process that will involve community input and really diving into these issues to figure out how we can really do that. So we're trying to provide guidance around how we think that could happen, what the community would like those parameters to be. And then, yeah, on Florida and Holly, you know, it is a mixed use center, so it could be redeveloped into a mix of housing and retail. And if they include housing, as Councilwoman Sawyer was saying, they'll have to include some level of affordability under our new regulations. So I think that's allowed, you know, under the existing conditions, and, you know, recommendations of the plan carry that forward as well.
It seems like it would have a lot less of a footprint and a kind of maybe neighborhood backlash, or I think there would be a lot of backlash to that, number one. But I think once it's built in and being in the built environment, I think it's because it is it just seems like it's a perfect little area for it, and it's got good access and good bus routes, so I think it's a good place, not for just a percentage of affordable units, but maybe a true affordable housing project.
Right. Yeah, and certainly that would be allowed as well if the city, the Denver Housing Authority, or an affordable developer wanted to come in and put a affordable project in there, that would work as well. I know there has been some concern about the height there, that whether 3 to 4 stories is appropriate or 2 stories. And so, that would be an issue, is if we limit the height there, that will limit the opportunities for that type of development. Whereas to make it that type of development more likely, allowing more height would be beneficial. But like I said, that's something we've gotten quite a few comments on from the community, is concern about height at that location. So all things to be balanced. Harvey.
Yeah, beating a horse up, but Winston Downs, I talked about at the last meeting. That area that again designated for duplexes doesn't sit well, with the neighborhood. Our access to Alameda and Monaco is limited now by traffic, putting additional density and doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And it certainly, as Councilman was talking about Cherry Creek, what they're doing, knocking down and putting them higher priced homes, it just doesn't make sense to even designate that area, and I'm not sure why it is designated that way. Last time you talked about another, I don't remember if it was Holly Hills, Hyatt Heights, one of those other areas that had access to Holly, and said, oh, traffic, we weren't going to put additional traffic on Holly. Well, if that's what you're doing up here, so I don't see the difference. I don't see why this has to be even shown on the map.
Yeah. So yeah, as we talked about it last time, and we haven't made any changes to this since the last time we talked. So we're still collecting feedback on it, and there's still an opportunity to change it if we decide to go that way. But
Who's the we?
I'm sorry.
Whom is the we?
We would be all of us if you as
Okay.
the steering committee.
Then I'm expressing my we.
Right.
We-ness here, saying I
Yes.
don't think it's a great idea, and we should not show that for that area.
Okay. Yeah, I hear you. And I'll just say that, again, the reason why we designated that initially was because it does seem to have a fairly well-connected street network in that little corner of the neighborhood. And that's sort of what we were looking at for where
Within the neighborhood, it's well connected. Getting out of the neighborhood, you're not going to. Adding any more density is not going to help you get out of the neighborhood. You can't get out now.
Right. Yeah, and that we talked about that in the last meeting, I think. So yeah, we've heard Harvey's opinion.
A lot.
No, it's good. Just if anyone else has thoughts on that area or any other areas that you think we should adjust the mapping, we'd like to have that conversation. So let us know.
Scott, if I can just jump in, I've got my hand up, but
Yeah.
just to build off of what Harvey was saying.
Yep.
So the Winston Downs community is actually an incredibly unique community. It is a community that has a significant portion of Orthodox Jewish residents.
Mhm.
And that means that there are a lot of people, particularly during Shabbat on Friday night, Saturday, during the day, who are walking,
Right.
who are walking in the middle of the street, who are, not using any transportations. We have a number of synagogues over there. And so I do think that it's also where there is an area that has the most affordable of all of the District 5 Council district. Those are our most affordable homes for the most part. And so I think clearly Harvey, who represents his neighborhood, has made it clear the neighborhood is not interested in duplex zoning there. ADU zoning might be a better conversation to have in that area. I think even that would be a hard sell. But I think Harvey makes a really good point, particularly when you look at the makeup of the community who lives in that area. I also think that zoning it or suggesting that in the future it be zoned for duplex without a conversation about having that preservation incentive there is also a little bit concerning, because it is the housing affordability that is most prevalent in all of Council District 5. And I think that I am concerned that at the very least, it is not in purple. It should be at the very least in purple, if not to preserve that housing, if not to be removed entirely. But I think Harvey makes the point that it should be, and I understand why.
Yeah, fair points. And yeah, the sort of cultural aspect of it is I think a good point that we should consider. So yeah, if, like I said, if we think, we as a committee think that area should be a preservation priority instead of just a duplex, or just preservation without the duplex, those are changes we can make.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Scott.
Yeah, and forgive me if this has already been said because I got kicked off of the Zoom like right at the beginning of this conversation. Um, but one thing that I guess I just keep coming back to with the duplex conversation in terms of density is that Blueprint Denver is pretty clear in the language that ADUs should be allowed throughout Denver in every neighborhood. So the, I guess, like precedent for taking what is today like a single family home and only has one allowable unit on it and allowing a second unit is already baked into Blueprint Denver. And since it seems like our purpose here is really figuring out how Blueprint applies to the near southeast area more specifically, to me it feels like the conversation around the duplex zoning versus ADU zoning is really just not really in terms of like density, but more of how the like built form of that lot and what would be appropriate is. So just my 2 cents there.
Yeah, and that's a good point that, ADUs, as you say, our citywide policy is that they should be allowed everywhere. And so we're carrying forward that recommendation in this plan as well. But the important thing to keep in mind is that these regulations, these duplex allowances would be in addition to the ADU allowance. So it would potentially be possible if you can make it work on your lot, which probably not a lot of lots it would actually work on, but you could in theory do a duplex and then also have an ADU on a lot. So keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, Scott, let me just, as somebody who is for ADU and cautious about duplex, people don't make money. Developers aren't interested in buying homes and adding ADUs. So mothers-in-laws and fathers-in-laws and retired parents and unemployed uncles have a place to stay. Developers are interested in buying property so they can divide it into two, making 2 different plots, 2 different properties, 2 different profits.
Right.
So there's we could probably have the conversation about how people can pay their rents by building an ADU and using it as an Airbnb. Like I know a number of people that are finding that is a way to stay in a neighborhood right now. But I think ADUs preserve and protect some of the people in the neighborhood, which is a very different thing than splitting lots and splitting profits.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that most people who build ADUs are the long-term homeowners who want the additional unit for any of those purposes you listed out. And yeah, people who are building duplexes are more likely someone looking to flip the property. So again, all the more reason we want to make sure that we get the duplex policies right to address those concerns. And then, yeah, I think ADUs have potential to add a lot of value to neighborhoods by helping people stay in their houses, helping people have their elderly parents live on their property in their own unit, place for their children just out of college to live, all these things that are beneficial to having an additional unit, or yeah, just rent it out to help supplement your income and pay your property taxes. So Spencer.
Yeah, I was just looking at the map and I wanted to comment that in Virginia Village, it might almost be better served to maybe be a little more specific in regards to where sorry, went on mute. Where that the preservation incentive is, because I can say like my portion of like Hudson in Florida isn't exactly like I would say preservation worthy, but maybe more of like if you go into probably Glencoe and west of that, Glencoe to Dahlia is probably more like what you would probably deem preservation type housing. It's more, that retro look, and Councilmember Cashman can probably chime in on that as well, where, where my home my house on Hudson is more just like a generic 1950s box. There's not really much to it that would scream like preserve me.
Yeah, and yeah, west of Glencoe, that's basically Cressona Park, which already has
Yeah,
the conservation overlay.
yeah.
So yeah, that area is the the really high quality mid-mod development. But I think there is value in some of the more typical type of development, and there may be an interest in preserving that. And again, this wouldn't necessarily be forcing anyone to preserve that, but
Yeah.
providing incentives to do so, because there is some value in preserving the range of housing types from that time, right? Not just the best examples.
Well, I appreciate you saying my house is preservation worthy.
And that this is direction coming from preservation professionals, which it's not my area of expertise, but they say that there is value in these more sort of typical types of development that you would see, and also value in the really high quality stuff. But there's
Okay, I just wanted to voice that, but I appreciate it.
yeah, no, it's a great point, and happy to talk about that more or look into it and make sure it makes sense. Lisa.
Just like I'm just kind of ripping off what I think Scott said, maybe it wasn't Scott, but maybe Jared, about how developers should take the opportunity to, build out Cherry Creek style townhomes in the neighborhood. But ADUs aren't always your uncle, and ADUs aren't always your wayward son, and ADUs are, and Airbnbs are, not necessarily all that desirable in neighborhoods, especially like Virginia Village. So, we got to be careful what we wish for. And, the ADU thing that, I know Airbnb is kind of starting to struggle and have some problems and so forth and so on. I don't know if it's a model that's going to last beyond the 25 years it's lasted, but it probably will. But, we don't also want, a lot of, kind of celebrated hotel units in the middle of your subdivision either. So we have to be careful there.
Yeah, right. And that's I think a broader question around how we regulate things like Airbnb.
Yeah.
And we do have regulations around those. Excise and license manages that stuff, and I think that'll continue to evolve as the industry continues to evolve. As you said, I don't think it's going away entirely, but it may not be at the same level it was in the last 5 or 10 years. But I don't know. That's not my area of expertise.
Scott, I can help you out with this one just
Yeah.
a little bit, because I sit on the short-term rental advisory committee as
Great.
well.
Yeah.
So Lisa, we hear you, and we actually have this conversation all the time. And I'll just tell you that Denver is actually a model that many cities have used when talking about how that we allow for Airbnbs at all, because we have what's called a primary resident requirement, and the primary resident requirement means that you have to live in the house, whether that means you rent out an ADU as a short-term rental, or whether it means you rent out a bedroom in your house as a short-term rental. You still have to live there, and what we have found is that makes a significant difference. So those like party houses and things like that we hear about on the news that are like horror stories in other cities across Denver, and we do have some, but those are illegal. And as soon as we find out about them, we have excise and license investigators who go out and shut them down. So just to let you know that is something that we take very seriously in the city of Denver. And that primary resident requirement is something that has been copied across the country from municipalities, because it has really worked particularly well.
Yeah, I think it does. I think there's always exceptions to that rule as well. Like I said, there's always, going to be an Airbnb that's going to invite, undesirable from time to time. And, and I don't think that's an issue, because I think ADUs are just a great idea of, like everybody says, ways for people to stay in their house, ways to be ambassadors to our city. I know people who just love having guests, and they're good at it. So that's a great thing too. But I still think that it's, that does give me kind of peace of mind that that owner occupied. How's it monitored, by the way?
So we actually have investigators that are specific to our excise and license department. And when they receive a complaint or so we have a very, we have a process where you have to be licensed in order to have an Airbnb at all. And then, so we monitor it on that side. If you're not licensed, you can't have Airbnb, and we actually go out and check to make sure that, there's this very specific things in the ordinance that require it, but it's examples like, is that where your voter registration is? Is that where your car is registered to? Is that where your driver's license is registered to? Do you pay the property taxes on that site, et cetera? Those kinds of things are how you establish your quote unquote primary residence. And then we have that process before you can even get a license. And then we have investigators who go out and investigate, particularly if we receive a call from a neighbor. You can call 311 and report it. If we receive a call from a neighbor that says there's a party house next door to me or whatever, the investigators will go out and check.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right, great. Thanks, Councilwoman, for providing that additional information. Councilman Cashman.
Yeah, a couple of things on the ADU thing. I have no desire for ADUs to be used for short-term rentals at all. When we started looking at ADUs, no one was talking about short-term rentals. It was as an addition to the housing stock. And that's what I, intergenerational housing, fine, I guess. But mainly as an addition to the housing stock. And I've been banging on the Josh and Abe with the ADUs for Denver project, and they're resistant. I would like two zoning options. One, if you have a neighborhood, and some do, that want to be able to use ADUs for short-term rental, they can have that zoning, and other neighborhoods don't, and they could have that zoning. So, but to go back to what Spencer was talking about, I have not been to Spencer's house, but I believe we probably live in similar homes, which I describe as badly built 1952 bungalows that you move in and rebuild the whole thing. But I would love to see an architect's rendering of what you could do with one of these standard 1,000 square foot bungalows, on how, when we talk about preservation, how that would actually look. So we could, when we get into this discussion in depth down the road, so we could show people, yeah, these little bungalows can actually become the basis for something that would add character to the neighborhood. So
Yeah.
just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we have that recommendation in there to create what we call a pattern book, which basically does exactly that. It provides, based on these sort of typical housing styles you see in the area, here's how you can do an appropriate addition, or a few different ways you can do an appropriate addition that preserves the character and provides additional living space and updates the property. And so, a lot of communities do that, and that's basically just a resource then for homeowners. It doesn't require anything necessarily, but it's just something that people who live in the area can look at and say, oh, that makes sense for my property. I'm going to hire an architect to help me do that. And so that I think is in the spectrum of preservation tools that we talk about, and that's all the way at one end of just providing guidance on how you could preserve it, to an actual landmark district or something at the other end that would enforce preservation. So and again, any of those tools could be appropriate in these areas where we're encouraging preservation, right? These don't necessarily have to be landmark districts. It could just be using a variety of tools to encourage folks to preserve their house like that. All right. So it seems like, having talked about this, that people are generally comfortable with where the policy is right now, that it makes sense to potentially allow duplexes in certain places in near Southeast, as long as we get the policies in place to do it correctly, to preserve affordability, preserve character, and not see the major changes that we've seen in other parts of the city. But it does sound like that there's some concerns about some of the specific areas that have been designated, or at least one area, the portion of Winston Downs. So before we move on, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding where generally the committee is, and then see if anyone has any other thoughts around the geographic aspect of this, whether that's the Winston Downs question or any other area we've designated or not designated. Sure.
I just, for one, if somebody's going to show up for their neighborhood as faithfully as Harvey has, I think you should have a plan reflect somebody's neighborhood being well represented. So I would be one more voice in the putting into the preservation or anti-displacement, whatever it takes to put another layer than just making that for duplex up there. That seems to be one of the reasons that you show up to serve your local government, is that your voice is heard maybe a little bit louder than the average person who's commenting online. So yeah, I'd be one other voice to take that off of at least the zoned as duplex, if not all the way off, at least put another layer of preservation or anti-displacement.
Okay, thanks. Councilwoman Black.
Thanks, Scott. I was a little late, so I missed some of the conversation. And I know Jenny's here from U Hills North. I don't know if anyone is here from Goldsmith. And I'm guessing Goldsmith would not be on board for this, but I guess with sort of the guardrails we're putting around it, it might be okay, but I don't know. We'll have to hear from more people from that neighborhood, but if they're not showing up, I don't know what I can do. But I'm just putting that.
What specifically about Goldsmith?
I just like the neighborhood by Bible Park. We do have a committee member from there.
Me.
Oh, I don't know who's talking.
It's Dustin.
Well, I know, I'm blanking on her name.
Erica.
Erica, yeah. Have you guys talked to your neighbors?
Yes, and I've had the signs out of my house since we first sent them out. So I've had a couple of people talk about it. I know I attend one of the earlier sessions. I'm curious what you're not sure about in terms of the plan and what the neighborhood wouldn't like. It's a small neighborhood, so I can ask many people because I know most of them.
Oh, you do? You know most of them? That's awesome. I sent everyone in the neighborhood a letter. I put it in my newsletter. I have not heard from people. I will say a few years ago when Denver worked on the group living proposal, had a lot of upset people in that neighborhood who didn't want people to have roommates. So I'm basing my comments on the kind of feedback I got during that conversation.
Maybe I'm misinterpreting the plan incorrectly then. So Scott, can you elaborate to me? From what I'm seeing here is low residential is essentially what we have now, and it looks like there's no recommend to change. And then the preservation incentive is what we talked about, I think, before the break, where that was identified as a somewhat of a historic area, and they would want to maintain that as much as possible, or the feel of that. Is that correct?
Right, yes, the low residential, right, would stay more or less the same. The preservation incentive would allow duplexes basically if the existing structure is preserved. So it would allow duplexes, but it would have that focus on preserving the character of the area.
Wasn't that only on like the corner lots where it was a large enough block to do it anyway?
No, not necessarily. It would be any lot that could make it work. Again, not necessarily all lots make sense for it.
Yeah, from memory and knowing the lot sizes around here, because there was a minimum, we wouldn't be rechanging the zoning requirements for a minimum lot size, so it kind of precluded a lot of the lots in the neighborhood anyway.
That would, for the lot splits, right, it would, there probably aren't a lot of lots that would qualify for actually splitting the lot, but this would allow building 2 units on one existing lot of the sort of the standard size.
I think I'm as confused maybe as Dustin, and Dustin, I'm sorry if I am calling you confused and you're not, but I assumed that in University Hills North, most of the lot sizes are 9,000 square feet or smaller. And I assumed that those lots were too small to put a duplex on, so it would really eliminate a lot of the lots for duplexes. But at the same time, the anti-displacement incentive in U Hills North and the preservation incentive were protective at the same time. So I feel like with all of those combinations that there was a lot of protections. And I as along with Councilwoman Black, I have not heard from neighbors that the whole duplex thing was scary for them. Whether, I don't know that they've all read it. I've advertised it. But it's not scary for me. I am all for density, especially, I mean, I know it's scary in a single family resident zoned area for density, but University Hills North is flanked by 2 light rail stations. It's right on I-25. It's got Colorado Boulevard. It's an amazing location. I would hate for it to lose the feel of what it is, but it'd be great if more people could enjoy it. So you know, I'm torn. I've lived in many Capitol Hills, you know, where parking is difficult. So I know that parking is something that a lot of my neighbors are afraid of losing the ability to park right in front of their house. And I think to myself, oh my gosh, if you only knew, you know, parking in front of your neighbor's house is, you know, sometimes one of those things that people feel very lucky to be able to do because it's close. So as long as the protections are there, I feel like it's okay. Is there a lot size limitation?
So there would be a lot size limitation, but it would be basically the same as the standard lots. So but then there's a difference between what would be allowed in zoning and what's actually practical, right? So you know, the area is zoned for minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet or something. So as long as you had that minimum 6,000 square feet, which most lots do, they would be allowed to build the duplex if they met the other requirements. Then, as you said, the preservation priority or the anti-displacement priority create additional protections or additional restrictions that in the preservation incentive area, they can only add it if they preserve the existing structure. And in the anti-displacement incentive area, they can only add it if they make sure at least one of the units is affordable or something like that. Again, we'll figure out the exact details of that through the future process, but that's sort of the intent. And so then, yeah, combine those additional restrictions combined with just the practicality of building a duplex on a 6,000 square foot lot and the size that you could get out of a development on that with the additional zoning changes that we're proposing in terms of making sure that any future addition or new development on a property fits in terms of scale, right? You know, right now the zoning envelope on these properties is pretty permissive, And so we see that in the new builds that do come in, that they are sort of out of scale. So another part of this is just changing the zoning overall to make sure that new builds and additions fit in better. So that'll limit the potential size of either new single unit houses or new duplexes, and along with other limitations around preservation or affordability. Yeah, we'll create limits on really how many of these are practically going to be built. But in theory, they would be allowed on pretty much all of the lots. It's just that most lots likely would not take advantage of it.
So quick one, put in the chat. And Jenny, yeah, now I am very confused, because to me a duplex would be 2 buildings on essentially 2 small lots. But are we saying a duplex can be 2 separate dwellings on the same lot? And then how's that different to the ADUs? Because if we're going to have ADUs everywhere, then it's really like a moot point, like no to duplexes, but yes to ADUs. The end result is the same, right?
So yeah, there are differences between duplexes and ADUs. Duplexes are what you said second, that typically a duplex would be 2 units in one structure on one lot. But a duplex each unit could be sold off separately or both rented out. And that's different from ADUs, which require the property owner to live on site, and the second unit can't be sold. It can only be rented short-term or long-term, or have somebody else live there. But the property owner has to live on site, and there are additional size requirements for ADUs. They have a fairly constrictive maximum square footage to qualify for an ADU. So they are treated differently from duplexes. So yeah.
But from a density standpoint, there could be the equal number of people living there.
Correct. Right. It is a second unit on the property, similar to a duplex. The differences are really in how big that can be and sort of how it's regulated in terms of who can live there. But yeah, you could have 4 people living in an ADU, or you could have 1 person, living in a large unit. That's as was mentioned, that all was dealt with in the group living text amendment a few years ago that set limits on how big a household can be. So yeah, it is sort of a nuanced difference between the duplex and the ADUs, but they are in terms of how they're regulated and in terms of how they could function and how they could look. There are differences.
So, and it depends on how you look at the end result. You can look at it from the developer's going to come in and price out everyone from the market, or are we going to have too many people living here? If you look at, is there too many people living here? ADUs, duplexes make no difference. But from an affordability standpoint, duplexes make more of a impact than ADUs.
Potentially, right? That the ADUs can't be sold off, right? So they're really intended to benefit the property owner, to give them an extra source of income, or provide, again, a space for grandma to live, or something like that. But they can't be sold off separately. Whereas the duplexes, yeah, really are more of an investment to get a more immediate return in renting it out or selling it off. But again, that ties into our goals around anti-displacement and affordability, that we would put additional restrictions on that to try to keep those affordable as much as possible.
Yeah, so I guess to go back to your original question, Kendra, about Goldsmith and that, and then I'll give up the microphone. I think you're right. A lot of people would, a lot of people do like the feel of the neighborhood, the size of the neighborhood. My personal opinion is, yes, I love the neighborhood. I think it's great. I don't know how sustainable that is for the next 20 plus years to keep it all single dwellings. But, from a practical standpoint, to Scott's point, it's an option. Is it going to turn half a Goldsmith into a bunch of duplexes? I don't know. I mean, they still have several hoops that they need to jump through to make it that. So I don't know. We've had this discussion on many things before in terms of density, and it's like, well, do we lock it down now and then in 20 years they can deal with it, or do we leave it permissive now and then, you know, there's still a lot of, if someone wants to put a duplex in, I'm sure they'll have to put up the sign that says, hey, we're going to put a duplex in. What does the residents think? What input do they want, right? So.
Well, I mean, what the residents think isn't one of the criteria when council approves a rezoning. It is
right,
what.
but if we look at Erica's house, who put a second story on the same size lot, that went up for community feedback for a month before they could even start.
Well, I don't know what you're talking about, but the neighbors don't get to decide that. So if it's in the plan, then someone can rezone it for that. So it isn't that we do ask for neighborhood feedback and they can come and speak at a hearing, but council votes on rezonings based on the criteria. And that's not one of the criteria. I'll also make a few points. Councilwoman Sawyer put this in the chat, but if you tore down your house in Goldsmith, and I guarantee you every single lot in Goldsmith could be big enough for a duplex. Each of those duplexes could potentially have an ADU. If ADUs were allowed. That is one thing that we're looking at, is that duplexes could have an ADU. And Councilman Cashman put in the chat that an ADU can only be 1,000 feet. And a duplex, you could tear down, a 2,000 square foot house and put in a duplex, and each side is 3,000 square feet. And they're tall. And Scott, when you're talking about height and keeping it within the neighborhood, I mean, you can go up to 2.5 stories, which is really 3 stories. And so I don't think people want that next to them. And so, like I said, I haven't heard from people, but I feel like I'm going to, and I don't think they're going to feel comfortable with it. And when we talk about the preservation recommendation, if you have to preserve the original house, then you can't build a duplex, right?
You would have to do it by adding an addition onto it. You'd have to keep the existing structure and then build an addition as the duplex.
So if this sort of, I'll call it the Bible Park neighborhood, is a preservation, it just says preservation incentive. So say someone wanted to build a duplex. We passed this plan as is. Someone wants to tear down their house and build a duplex. Can they do that? Because this only recommends preservation incentive, or do we have to do something to create a preservation incentive?
Yeah, and you may have missed this part of the conversation at the beginning. But yeah, that's something we talked about when we first started talking about this, is that we would need to get these policies in place before we start allowing the duplexes. So figuring out the preservation aspect of it, figuring out the anti-displacement aspect of it, figuring out the overall design improvement aspect of it, that would apply to limit the height and address those concerns you were talking about. So the way it's written in the plan is that we wouldn't allow duplexes until we get all of these policies in place. So yeah, it wouldn't be a situation where we adopt the plan and then the next week somebody can apply to rezone their property to duplex. It would be, we adopt the plan, and then sometime, hopefully in the next couple of years, we will come back and through an additional community process, develop these specific regulations that would apply and allow duplexes under these specific circumstances, and figuring out all those details. And then we would implement those regulations, and then people could apply for their duplexes.
And so who creates those policies? Is it CPD or is it the community?
It would
It's not-
be
Is it something that council votes on?
right. It would be a text amendment to the code, along with potential rezoning and potential other changes to the municipal code. And so, yeah, it would likely be a city-led project, engaging the community members to get into the details. Talk to home builders, talk to architects, figure out the specifics of what makes sense, talk to affordability experts. And so, yeah, there would be an additional process that would engage the community, propose changes to the regulations that would then, of course, go to council for a vote and adoption.
Okay, well, I understand that, and I know I've talked to you about that a bunch of times, but thank you for explaining it again. And Councilwoman Sawyer, in the last plan she worked on, they did amend it to say that single family or single unit neighborhoods would remain primarily single unit. And I like the word primarily, but I feel that that is something that a lot of people might like to see in this draft. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, and we've talked about that, and we're having internal discussions around that. But as we've talked about, with these regulations in place, we expect the number of duplexes to be fairly limited. So whether that is in the plan or not, it will likely be the case that we're not expecting these neighborhoods to fully turn over. And so they would stay primarily single unit. Chris. Do you take his hand down? You'd not. Jared, I guess.
Yeah, I think because we keep coming back to this duplex conversation, just trying to figure out how do we get this clearly communicated, that specifically the duplex conversation seems to be the hot button issue, which maybe we always knew it was going to be. But again, like I was just reading through the plan, and we keep using the term missing middle. But if we can be more explicit in areas of the plan and actually say like duplex, and what that means is 2 units, no minimum lot size, and just be as direct as we can, I think we at least would benefit everybody who put their time into this plan to not feel like that got kind of slid in somehow.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And as we've just demonstrated, it's a complex issue that even folks who've been paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, from my vantage point, I know nobody who would not take $100,000 over asking tomorrow to sell to a developer. Like if you're leaving the neighborhood, I know no one in any of these neighborhoods who's leaving the neighborhood who would not sell for $100,000 over asking to a developer. No questions asked, and no questions asked. The developer is going to put a duplex on that piece of property. No questions asked, and double their profit.
Right.
So like for me, it just makes business sense. Like I have enough friends who do this for a living that as soon as the door is there, people are going to be walking through it. So however the language is phrased, whatever the incentives are, I think as soon as the door is open, I think it's pretty realistic. Any of us who've lived in Denver long enough understand the developers run the city, and they'll run every neighborhood that they can. That's obviously a very biased perspective, but nonetheless, that's been at least my experience.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. All right, Chris, you back?
Yeah, sorry, I was having technical difficulties there. The one thing I want to make sure, and maybe you can confirm it, what we're saying though from a duplex perspective and what's practical, for a developer to come in and develop a duplex and them to actually sell that duplex, they will need a parcel and a legal description. They're not going to be able to come and build on a 6,000 square foot lot and have a duplex without a practical HOA that they're creating for a duplex. So from a practical standpoint, the concern of somebody coming and building 2 units and then selling 2 units without not be able to create a parcel, I don't know practically how that works.
Yeah, so
Right.
and that gets into again more nuance in the way our regulations work with the difference between a zone lot and an assessor parcel. That you can create 2 assessor parcels on one zone lot. Is one way to do it, or another way would be to condo out the units.
Because we're saying there's a minimum zone lot or a minimum lot that they've got to create. And if they don't have enough space to do it, and we're at 6,000 feet, then they're going to be going down a condominium process to just be able to sell and have somebody finance the property.
Right.
And practically speaking, nobody's going to set up an HOA for 2 units. Like that's going to be cost prohibited, and who's going to manage that? And there's ongoing expenses. There's all these pieces that make what we're talking about probably not happening just by the nature of, I mean, things change, but that's the only way I ever see that happening, to be able to obtain financing for the end user.
Right. Yeah. And again, what we more likely see in this situation is the assessor parcels split. They can, for ownership purposes and for assessor purposes, can split the zone lot down the middle. It is, from a zoning perspective, still one lot, but they could sell off the 2 halves of it. But I have seen situations where people have condoed out a duplex and messed with all that. So it does happen, but yeah, it makes it less likely if they have to go that route. Lisa.
Yeah, I definitely think, I mean, it's very easy to just build a duplex on a single lot and have it a condominium style, and no, you're not going to have an HOA. You're just going to have a simple agreement between the 2 parties that own it. And I have a friend who lives in a 3-plex in Northwest Denver, and I remember actually developing a fix and flip of a duplex. I think it was in the off Santa Fe. That was exactly the case. They just came to an agreement between the 2 separate owners, and it's a binding and recorded agreement that they just agreed on how they were going to handle all the needs of the actual physical lot and water, sewer, all that kind of stuff. So so I can see that definitely happening. A lot of townhomes in Denver aren't really townhomes. They're really condominiums where they don't own the land, they just own the building. So
yeah. So yeah, there are ways to make it work, and of varying levels of complexity, and so yeah, well, again, some people will find it worth it and will pursue it. Other people won't, for various reasons, and we don't expect the whole neighborhoods to flip over for various reasons. All right. We spent a long time on this one. We still have a few items we want to get through tonight. So unless anyone has any last second comments on the residential policies, Councilman Cashman. You're muted.
All day long. Jenny made a comment that I think is valid, what we're talking about, and this is a topic that will go into the discussion, is we're limiting our property values in this discussion. By putting restrictions on what a developer can build, we may very well be having a community discussion. Well, this is a very noble thing, but do you in fact want to limit the money you can get for selling your property? So just throwing that out.
Yeah, I mean, and that's always the balance, is the flip side of protecting your property value is preserving affordability, right? And there are also benefits to things like character preservation, right? That if you actually look at property values in preservation districts are typically higher than values outside preservation districts, and there are various reasons for that, but part of it is the extra protection for the character that preserves value. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into or can impact property values, and we have to evaluate to what extent we want to preserve people's investment in their property and to what extent we want to promote affordability and allow flexibility and preserve character. And these are all things that are in tension and we're trying to strike a balance on. But yeah, a good thing to keep in mind as we talk about this stuff. All right, good discussion. Really appreciate all the comments. That was helpful. So thank you for that. Now moving on, hopefully we can move through these other ones a little bit quicker. So as we've talked about at the last meeting back in November, and as sort of came up in the comments we talked about at the beginning, concern about providing adequate infrastructure for the growth we're expecting. And so we have recommendations in place that are intended to make sure we're getting the infrastructure ahead of or concurrent with new development. So the way we're trying to address that is having a policy around rezonings in areas where we are directing additional growth, where we're allowing more height than what is currently allowed there. So these are the areas where we're expecting to see most of the growth. You know, as we spent a long time talking about the residential areas, and we want to allow additional growth there, but overall it's going to be a relatively small percentage of the growth we're going to see in the city and in the area. Most of that's going to go to these centers and corridors where we're directing it. And so making sure we have the infrastructure in place to accommodate that. So again, in the areas where we're directing additional growth, where we're allowing additional height, we want to make sure that before that development comes in, we have the infrastructure in place. So when someone applies, what we're recommending is that when somebody applies for rezoning, that we require them to do an infrastructure analysis. And in some areas we'll have clearly defined needs. You know, we're calling for the Evans corridor study that'll define what's needed on Evans. So we'll have that study in place to tell us exactly what's needed. We might not have that in other areas. So there may be a little more work that goes into that, but it'll be as part of that process, they will look at what is needed to make sure we have the adequate infrastructure in place. And then require them to provide that infrastructure or make sure it is provided again before or concurrent with the development. And if they can't meet that requirement, then we would not be supporting the rezoning. We would say the rezoning in that situation would not be consistent with the recommendations of the plan, and we would recommend that City Council not approve the rezoning if we don't think they can provide the adequate infrastructure to serve it. Prioritizing pedestrians, bikes, and transit in terms of what we're looking at. We want to make sure that we are referencing our design goals. So this would be a new addition to this policy as it's continued to evolve. So we have a lot of recommendations around, you know, what our streets should look like, how they should function, things like that. So we want to make sure that when we're doing this analysis, we're keeping in mind what the goals are for the infrastructure. So it's not just that we have sidewalks, but we have the type of sidewalks that we want to see. And then also looking at how we can balance that against other needs. So we want to have this requirement in place, but we know there's also other things we want to achieve, like getting things out of the former Chapter 59 old code zoning, like providing additional affordable housing. So if we have situations where we have competing goals, providing an opportunity to sort of evaluate those and see which is most important or which is most valuable to the community. So providing a little bit of flexibility around that. Councilwoman Black.
I am struggling with determine what infrastructure should be completed before or concurrent with development. So say I want to build an apartment building on Colorado and Evans. And there's going to be 200 units and there's going to be a parking lot and people are going to not want all that traffic. So is that going to be, so who decides? Does Dottie say that's too many cars, or do we say, well, that's a reality and they've got water and they've got wastewater and they've got everything they need, but so I just don't know exactly what that means.
Yeah, And this is a summary, so there's a little more detail in the actual draft. And then again, this is something that would be further fleshed out following adoption of how that would actually work. But what that would likely look like is it would go through the large development review process. And so we would work with Dottie and all our other partners to evaluate the infrastructure. And again, it would be focused more on the multimodal infrastructure than on the vehicle capacity of the streets. But we would also be looking at the network connections and making sure we're getting those in place so that people aren't forced to drive out onto Colorado and Evans necessarily to get where they're going if they are driving. So yeah, it would be a sort of holistic look at all of the mobility infrastructure needs of the area. And if we determine that we don't think that the infrastructure is adequate to serve the proposed rezoning, then yeah, we would recommend denial of the rezoning. And so, in that situation, we likely work with the applicant to make improvements before it gets to you. But ultimately, as you know, they can request a hearing and move forward, and then it would be up to council to make the decision on whether they think it is meeting the intent of the plan or not.
All right, I just don't want neighbors or residents to assume that if it's going to create a lot of traffic, then we don't have the infrastructure. Because every time a new development is proposed, the number one concern I hear from people who are opposed to it is they're worried about traffic.
Yep.
And so I don't know how we explain that further, but we're not going to deny a development because it generates traffic. So I just don't want people to think that is what it is.
Yeah, that's a good point, and we'll make sure that's clear.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Anything else on this one? Okay. Moving on then. So Colorado Station, as we've talked about, recommending implementing a street grid on the south side of the station, the right side of the image here, since we're looking east in this image, where the Freeway Forward and the public storage and the RTD park and ride is, that as that redevelops, we want to get a connected street network in there. There have been some questions around why we're recommending putting streets in there, encouraging people to drive in that area when it's not really going to be connected to the larger network. Generally our policy is to create a connected network, but again, with the railroad tracks and the highway and things like that, it'll be of limited overall connectivity. So I think it's a valid question of why do we want to put in streets to serve that area. And I think there's a few things. One is the streets serve all modes of transportation, not just cars, but they also include bike lanes and sidewalks and serve buses. They also serve the fire department. We need fire access to these things, so having streets or connections all around buildings is important for fire safety. And then it also serves as sort of an organizing principle for the development, that by creating blocks and lots that are a reasonable size, it allows an appropriate scale of development and flexibility and evolution over time as things develop and redevelop, having that grid in there. So that's sort of the reasons we want to create a grid. But what we're thinking about is, again, that maybe not all of them actually need to have cars on them. Maybe some of these streets could be pedestrian and bike only, or they could be what we call shared streets, which do allow cars, but really discourage them, and they're really intended to prioritize other modes of transportation. So what we're thinking is including in here a recommendation to evaluate these future new streets for which ones really need to have cars on them, which ones could be alternative types of streets, and figure that out as we get into the design of the area. Councilwoman Black.
So, the recommendation is that we study it. And so in the meantime, if someone comes up with a proposal for a development and or a rezoning, do they have to wait until that's done, or can they move forward?
It would, in a situation like that, it would likely trigger an LDR as well. And so as part of the LDR, we would want to do that evaluation and figure out what the street network should be. And as part of that, we can evaluate, which ones are car streets and which ones are other types. So it would be, as part of the proposal, we would make them sort of go through this process and work with them on figuring out the broader design. So they wouldn't necessarily have to wait, but it would be their application would sort of trigger doing the work.
Even if it's just a 1 acre or 2 acre project?
Yeah, again, I think what we will recommend in the plan is that, even for something that wouldn't normally qualify for LDR, we want them in this area to go through that process, because we need that broader look at it, that we don't want one-off developments to go in here and then limit our ability to achieve our long-term goals for it. So.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, good question.
Remind me what an LDR is?
It is large development review. So it's an additional process that proposed rezonings or proposed developments have to go through. That is typically reserved for, as the name implies, large developments of over 5 acres. But in certain circumstances, we can require it for other developments if we know it's part of a redevelopment of a larger area. So that's what we would do here. So it triggers additional review and process where we get all the departments together and evaluate something and make sure we're getting the long-term needs met for the area in terms of infrastructure, in terms of parks, in terms of affordability. All the departments come together and work through it. Good question. Sorry for using acronyms that most of you aren't familiar with. All right. Anything else on Colorado Station? All right. And then this is something else that we talked about at a previous meeting, but wanted to revisit it around what the appropriate heights are along Evans. So if you remember, here's our height maps: base height on the left, incentive height on the right. So Evans, east of Dahlia, it has 5 stories around Holly and Monaco and Quebec, and then 3 stories allowed in between. And that would be up to 7 stories at the intersections and up to 4 stories in between with the incentives. So as Councilwoman Black had brought up at a previous meeting and has mentioned to me again recently, that maybe it makes more sense to allow more areas of 5 stories, potentially along the entire corridor. We haven't really had anybody comment on this issue specifically so far. So we don't really have a lot of public input on it. So that means, I guess, folks are okay with it for the folks who have looked at it. But wanted to have that conversation again with you all around what you think the appropriate heights are. Again, the reason we've done it the way we have now is we think it makes the most sense to, at this point, concentrate new development, new growth around those intersections. And so that's why we allow additional height there and let the areas in between sort of evolve more slowly, while not creating as much incentive to redevelop them by allowing more height. There various advantages to doing it that way, that it sort of concentrates the amenities, makes them more likely to be redeveloped and happen in a way that comes in the form and the design that we'd like to see. So, but if there's interest in allowing more height overall in the area, we'd like to have that conversation. Councilman Cashman.
Yeah, I realized this afternoon that I'm confused on the future height guidance with incentives map on the right.
Okay.
Why we have some colors like 4-story +1, and why don't we just list the total height? I'm kind of confused.
So those areas, that sort of orange color, 4 stories, is 4 stories. So that would be 3-story zoning that would allow 4 stories with the incentive. So the +1 there is indicating that it is getting 1 additional story from the incentive over the 3-story base.
Well, why don't we do that with all of these?
So that is, for the incentive height. So the 4, the 7, the 12, the 16, and the 30.
Okay,
Those are
the only ones with incentives.
Those are the ones that you could only reach with incentive.
Okay, the rest are the same as the base.
Right.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry if that was confusing. Councilwoman Black.
Thanks. I think that I will speak for District 4 and not District 6, but I think Evans should be 5 stories. You talk about not, I don't know what you said, preserving what's there. I will say on the District 4 side, I can't think of anything worth preserving. I hope I'm not insulting anyone, but it's on the east side of I-25, it's industrial zoning. There's a lot of storage. There used to be factories there. Now there are other things, but I am someone who has always felt that density should go on our corridors. And I don't think 5 stories is particularly tall, but I just think that's more appropriate. It's particularly in that very small section between Monaco and Holly that you have at 3 stories. I don't know why we wouldn't go higher there. There's buildings already there that they sure seem like they're taller than 5 stories, but I guess they're not. But I just don't know why we wouldn't do that. Now, I would only want that on the first kind of block, and then I would scale it down. But I feel like we should have more density along the corridors. There's a bus down Evans. People can hop on the bus and go to the light rail station. And I think that would be a great place for housing. And it just seems weird to me, particularly on that section between Holly and Monaco, that we would just exclude, it looks like 2 blocks of it. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I think those are good points. And like I said, we're open to it. If the steering committee thinks that makes sense, we're open to changing it. Jenny.
I agree with Councilwoman Black. I think 5 stories on the main corridor is good. I'm just looking at the Colorado Station area. On the left, it's purple at 20 stories, but on the right, it looks like it's 30 stories plus 10, which is not really 20 stories plus 10. So which is it? Is it 20 stories or is it 30 stories? Let's get that figured out, because
so the base height is 20 stories. It's zoned CMX, most of it's zoned CMX 20, which allows 20 stories. And then the way the incentives work is in that CMX 20 zoning, it allows up to 30 stories if they provide the additional affordable housing. So, so yeah, it's 20 stories base, 30 stories maximum with the incentive.
Okay, so that needs to be corrected because
Yeah.
on the map on the right, it says that it's 30 stories base plus 10 stories, which makes it 40 stories.
Yeah, so it's becoming clear to me that what we were hoping was adding additional clarity by saying what the increment was is actually just confusing folks. So we will fix the legend on that map so it's clearer what is going on.
Okay, and I'm just looking for clarification. Is it 30 stories or 40 stories there?
It is 30 stories.
Thank you. All right.
Councilman.
Yeah, thank you. You know, if instead of well, you're suggesting 5 stories on both sides of Evans, we could do 8 stories on Councilman Black's side, and then 2 stories with some parkland on, just kidding. Yeah, I think I pretty much am along with the councilwoman's comments with at least in most areas, and I'll continue to look at it. I think 5 stories makes sense. I just hope we have, you know, we talked a lot about explanations on how we might work in duplexes in the future. I think we really need to make statement about if we're going to be dumping in a lot of density along Evans, the need to really, that should be dependent on that Evans study that tells us that corridor can handle it even with the light rail station in some proximity, because it's not in a lot of proximity to about half of that corridor between I-25 and Quebec.
Right.
So I don't want to hear the howls that we don't care and we're not paying attention. Unfortunately, RTD is not where we need it to be right now. Our ability to move people in general is not what we need it to be. And thank you to Jenny for asking that question, because I was just seeing the same thing and thinking, ooh, I don't know if I can go for 40 stories there. Feeling a little bit too much like New York.
Yeah. Yeah, and great point about the mobility and on Evans, and agree, as we were just talking about, you know, the areas where we're recommending additional height would be conditional on making sure we have the infrastructure in place. And on Evans, that would include, you know, completing that study and figuring out what the needs are. That'll identify the things we need in the near term, and then in the longer term as things redevelop. So yeah, if you're open to 5 stories with that condition, I think we have that covered, and we can update the map. But let's hear what other folks have to say. Lisa.
I'm just, I agree with everything along Evans, but I just want to point out that, you know, my favorite intersection, Holly in Florida, 2-story without or with incentive. You know, it's a great place, a great site to build some affordable housing. So can't we just change that to 3-story on the incentive, or even 4?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we, if you remember in the draft recommendations from the summer, we had it as 3-story base, 4-story with incentive. And as I said, we got a lot of comments with concerns about that from the people who lived around there. So that's why we changed it to 2 stories in the draft plan. The way the incentives work in the current regulations, the current code, is they don't apply to 2-story zoning. It starts at 3 stories. That's the lowest that the incentives apply to. So the incentives don't apply to 2-story zoning. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't put a recommendation in there that if somebody wanted to build affordable housing in the area, we could allow 3 stories to accommodate that at that location.
And I think that, you know, I mean, even at your base height be 3 stories so that you could have the incentive, because, you know, you talked about, you know, or we had a long discussion about how the, you know, allowing duplexes in Virginia Village is probably kind of in a way a non-starter. It's going to require a lot of policy changes. So I would think that that would kind of affect property values in the neighborhood a lot more, and be a lot more, in a way, controversial than, you know, something that's on a pretty commercial corner.
Yeah.
Gas station there, for God's sake.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with you that, like I said, that was our initial proposal. We got a lot of comments in opposition to it. You know, some of it is people like the existing businesses, they like the Ace, they like the coffee shops there, they like
Oh, yeah, but I don't see how that would have to change. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's, you know, that's just the way sometimes people think about it is
Yeah. hey, I
Oh.
like it too. I like it too. Who doesn't? It's a nice strip commercial. It's well leased almost all the time. And you know, it seems like it's well managed and well maintained. So I like it too.
As someone who lives on Hudson directly behind that area, I can tell you probably a lot of that pushback comes from not wanting to become like those houses on Dahlia and Louisiana that have apartments looking directly in your backyard. You know, part of the reason a lot of people buy these single family homes in this area is so, you know, you do get a little bit of privacy, and you build a 4-story apartment complex directly behind me. You can imagine how that's kind of a little invasive and maybe inappropriate for that area.
Well, when I look at what's happening in, you know, like in Wash Park, when people have, you know, scraped the bungalows and put 4-story houses that have absolutely like no land left over, all you're doing is looking into other people's houses and backyards. So, you know, it's happening everywhere in town, you know. People are not that sensitive about, you know, what they build and what they look into.
Yeah, and right, I think,
I mean, look at some of the houses along, you know, or along Franklin and or just, you know, you know, just a little bit south of Wash Park along Marion or Lafayette, and what's been scraped and what's been built there. You know, everybody's looking into everybody else's house at this point.
Right. Yeah.
Especially if you have a deck.
I think Spencer articulated what a lot of the concern we heard from was, and so yeah, maybe there's ways we can balance those concerns around how it's designed and how it relates to the existing housing, while still allowing more opportunity for affordability on the shopping center site. So we'll take a look at it. Jared.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in support of Cashman and Black's comment about Evans. I think we're all trying to figure out what to do with Evans, and it does seem to be that at least maybe incentivizing density there. Currently, everything is 1-story because it is gas stations. So until you figure out how to get somebody who's going to spend money to redevelop something other than a gas station on Evans, it feels like, you know, do what you can to get business and development to move towards Evans. And if base height is one way to move businesses towards it, that seems to be. Again, I appreciate the caution in like coming off of Evans and scaling down. But if we're going to try to get something other than a gas station, somebody's got to have to make more money than the last 3 builds, which are all gas stations.
Right. Yeah, good point. All right, so yeah, we'll take another look at the height there on Evans and look at 5 stories right along the corridor, scaling down to 3 behind that. All right, I think we have one more topic we wanted to talk about, and this is some proposed changes in University Hills North, based on comments from Jenny in the U Hills North community and from Councilwoman Black. So we have this area just north of Iliff at Dahlia that is currently residential high medium, and it would allow up to 8 stories on our height map. And there's some concern that that doesn't really fit in with this sort of adjacent single unit. So we're looking at changing that to low, medium, and a 5-story maximum height. And then there's these medical offices just on the south side of Dahlia there that are zoned hospital right now. And so we kept them included in the broader campus there. But we think it makes sense to change those also to residential low, medium, and more like a 3-story maximum height. The Denver Academy property, which is the majority of that campus area, would stay campus. We expect the school to stay there for the foreseeable future. But again, that had a 5-story height maximum, which maybe that doesn't make sense and fit in with the community. So looking at lowering the height there to a 3-story maximum. And then for the Claremont senior living on the south side of that, again, dropping that to a low, medium residential and a 3-story designation to fit in better with the community. So had several conversations with Councilwoman Black about these. Just wanted to sort of share these changes you can expect to see and see if anyone had any questions or concerns about them before we put them into the next draft. All right. Take it that everyone is okay with that. So we're about at time here. If anyone has any other quick topics, let me know. But just a few items I wanted to go over before we end. And as I mentioned, the draft plan will still be up for about a week and a half at least. So as we talked about, please encourage your neighbors, your friends, make sure your RNOs are sending out the information. We'd still like more folks to take a look at the plan and provide feedback on it. As we talked about previously, we could use more photos. If anybody has good photos they would like, please send them to us. We set up a Google Drive that you can upload those to. I can resend that link. And then we are planning on having next month's meeting in person. So it'll be the same time. I believe it's February 8th or 9th, whatever that first Wednesday or second Wednesday is in February at 6 p.m. But it will be in person. And Councilwoman Black has gotten us some space at the Junction Food Hall there at Colorado Station. So that's where we're planning on having the meeting. Follow up with more details once we get things locked down. But please, we know it may be a little more inconvenient to actually have to come to someplace on a Wednesday evening, but would like to get everybody together in person to have a discussion about this stuff. So please make your arrangements to attend the in-person meeting next month.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. Yeah, that's everything. So it's 8 o'clock now. Thanks, everyone. Really good discussion tonight. Really appreciate all the thoughtful comments. Let me know if you have any more questions or comments, and we'll see you all in person next month.
Bye, all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, friends. Oh, hey, Scott, real quick. I never heard back from Steve over at Unravel. So are you guys still planning on, we'll just do Junction instead?
Yeah, I think we'll just do Junction instead. Thanks for trying on that. But
yeah, I don't know if it was holiday or New Year or whatever, but just kind of non-responsive. So apologize.
I don't think Steve manages it anymore. He's gone more back to his coffee beans.
Yeah, no, he's back. He's just in there occasionally. I happen to know him from high school, so every once in a while I get to pull favors at Unravel. But yeah, I was trying to get the GM, but they're like, "Oh, I can't do that. I have to talk to Steve." So, but Dustin, if you have any strings that you can pull at Unravel, let me know. So,
you probably know Steve better than I do.
It's all good. All right, y'all. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.